In the previous 2 lectures, we went ahead and created a custom progress bar renderer for our iOS project. So on iOS, we already see that this onElementChange method is going to evaluate the progress of the progress bar and change the color of the progress dynamically by evaluating the value of that progress. And we're also scaling, at least on the y-axis, how the progress bar is going to look. Now let's go ahead and implement something similar on Android, because if we run our application on Android, we still see pretty much the default element that we would see on any default Android application. This is the normal progress bar that any Android application is going to have, unless they are, of course, implementing something custom. So that's the default progress bar. Now, what I will do in Android is pretty much the exact same thing. I am going to start by creating a new custom renderers folder, and inside of the custom renderers folder, I am going to be creating the custom progress bar renderer. Now, in this case, it is called the exact same way as my iOS custom renderer, but it doesn't have to be that way. It's just a nice way of identifying them. It doesn't have to be that way at all. Now, this is also going to be inheriting from progress bar renderer, which is coming still from Xamarin Forms, but notice that because we are on Android, this time we have to use Xamarin Forms Platform Android. So still pretty much the same thing. And in fact, I could also override the onElementChanged. And by the way, it was telling me that the parameter-less constructor is no longer valid, or it's just deprecated. So I'm just going to use this constructor instead. But you can see how we have the same onElementChanged, because after all, this is coming from the progress bar renderer. Of course, by the way, this is a different class than this one. They are called the same, but one is coming from iOS and the other one is coming from Android. But notice what we're going to have available. In the parameter, we also have the old element and the new element. And because this is a progress bar, we're going to see the progress. So it turns out we can use exactly the same thing. I'm going to be making the same evaluations and assigning the same colors. Now, of course, in this case, the control is a different type. It's not a control, an iOS control, a UI progress view. This is a progress bar, an Android widget progress bar. So there is no such thing as the tint color. What we do have access to is to the progress drawable, and from the progress drawable we have the setTint method. Now the setTint method will be able to receive a color, but of course there is no UI color on Android, that is an iOS type. However, Xamarin is very good with us, and in the color struct, notice that color comes from Xamarin Forms, they have added a toAndroid method. So it's going to be quite easy for us to change or cast this color to one that Android understands. And so let me just go ahead and change all these progress tint colors for the setTint method that we need, and make sure that I do the cast to Android, not to UI color. And this is it. Now, of course, I also have to tell Xamarin Forms that this is the one that I want to use as the override of the normal renderer for my progress bars on Android as well. So I would have to do an export just like I did on iOS. I'm going to go ahead and copy the export renderer line and paste it over here on Android. So we're going to be exporting it also to the progress bar. Of course, this is going to be applied to Android only, because we are going to be exporting the custom progress bar renderer, but the one that comes from Expenses Droid Custom Renderers, which is one that comes from Xamarin Forms Platform Android progress bar renderer. So we're simply with this line again telling Xamarin to use these as the override for the normal render. Now before I go ahead and test this out, let me actually scale just like I did on iOS. Now on Android, we have from the control the scale Y property, which means that we can set the scaling just with this line of code. Even a little bit easier than we did with iOS. So that is actually everything that we have to do to make this custom renderer on Android resemble what we have on iOS. Now let me go ahead and run this on the Android simulator. And so now when the application runs on Android, we see that indeed the progress bar is taller and that we are using some custom colors that we can see here in the health. Let me go ahead and make the same thing that I did on iOS by adding a ridiculous amount of 5,000 to my expenses in the form of rent. So this is going to be for housing, which is a category that I haven't set yet here on Android. Of course, these statuses don't mean anything. Let me go ahead and save this. We now see the rent down here, and in categories, housing is now using pretty much all of the progress because 5,000 is just ridiculous. And we see the other color. Before health was the bigger one with some purplish colors. Now housing is ridiculously high and we see this red color. So there you have it, how to build the same custom renderer that we had on iOS on Android as well. Now we are not done with custom renders. While you now know how to use them, in the next couple of lectures I want to do something even a little bit more interesting with them. It's going to resemble something that we just did with the progress in here, evaluating a value that is coming directly from the element and not just some static value that we're setting like this 4.0, but to make a little bit more changes. So we're just going to continue to practice a little bit more with custom renders for both Android and iOS.